It was one of those scorching summer afternoons when the asphalt shimmered like liquid glass and the air hung heavy with heat. On the outskirts of a quiet Georgia town, 3 young boys, Malik, Deshaun, and Tyree, were killing time by the roadside, tossing pebbles and talking about dreams far bigger than their small neighborhood. None of them knew that fate was about to test their kindness in a way they'd never forget. A few yards away, a sleek black Bentley had come to an awkward stop, its rear tire flat and sagging. The man standing beside it was clearly out of place. Here his tailored suit glistened faintly with sweat, his gold watch catching the sunlight. The locals didn't see men like him often, and even less so stranded on the side of their cracked, dusty road. Cars sped by, slowing just enough for curious stares. But no one stopped. Malik noticed first. "Yo, that man looks stuck," he said, squinting against the glare. The others followed his gaze. "Probably some rich dude," Tyree shrugged. "He'll figure it out." But Malik couldn't look away. Something about the scene, the man's frustration, the empty road pulled at him. "Come on," he said, already walking toward the car. "Ain't nobody too rich to need a little help." The billionaire, whose name was Mr. Whitmore, looked up as the boys approached. His expression was wary at first. 3 dusty kids in ripped sneakers offering help didn't exactly scream professional roadside assistance. But there was something earnest in their eyes, something that cut through the wall of privilege and suspicion. Within minutes, the boys were at work. Tyree found the jack, Deshaun handled the bolts, and Malik guided the spare tire into place. Sweat dripped down their faces, and the heat burned their hands, but they worked with quiet determination. Mr. Whitmore watched, astonished. He had assistants, chauffeurs, and endless resources, but in that moment, it was 3 strangers from the edge of town who'd come through when he needed someone most. When the job was done, he tried to hand them money, but Malik shook his head. "Nah, sir," he said with a grin. "We just glad to help." They waved him off, laughing as they walked back home, not knowing their small act of kindness had just rewritten their future. Because the next morning, long before the neighborhood even woke up, the rumble of an unfamiliar engine echoed through the streets. When Malik's mother peeked through the curtain, she nearly dropped her coffee. Parked in front of their house was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, shining like a dream in the dawn light, and, stepping out of it, was Mr. Whitmore himself, holding something that would change their lives forever. The day was blazing hot, the kind of heat that made the pavement shimmer like molten silver and every breath feel thick with dust. Malik wiped the sweat off his forehead as he sat on the curb with his 2 best friends, Deshaun and Tyree. They lived in a small, run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta, where laughter was louder than money and dreams often floated higher than reality could reach. It was the beginning of another long summer day, and the 3 boys had nowhere special to be. They talked about basketball, music, and the wild cars that sometimes passed their block machines that seemed to come from another world entirely. Malik always said that one day he'd drive one of those cars, not because of luck, but because he'd work hard enough to earn it. Just as the conversation turned to who could win in a foot race, a sound broke the afternoon, a sharp pop, followed by a hiss, like air escaping from a balloon. The boys turned toward the main road, where a black Bentley had pulled to the side. A man in a suit stepped out, looking down in disbelief at a rear tire that sagged flat against the ground. The sight was unusual in their area. Luxury cars rarely ventured that deep into their neighborhood, and when they did, they never stopped. Malik squinted through the haze, curiosity written across his face. "Yo, check that out," he said, pointing toward the stranded car. Deshaun frowned. "Man, that's a rich dude. He'll probably call someone." But Malik shook his head. "Out here, ain't no signal good enough for that. He looks stuck." Tyree shrugged, kicking a pebble across the road. "Why we gotta care? He ain't one of us." But Malik couldn't shake the sight of the man's frustration. He could tell from the way the man looked around, checking his watch, pacing by the car, that this wasn't just inconvenience, it was helplessness. Despite his wealth, the man seemed completely out of his element. "Come on," Malik finally said, standing up. "We got time. Let's help him out." The others hesitated for a moment, but followed him anyway. They crossed the street, their sneakers scuffing against the cracked asphalt. As they got closer, the man looked up, surprise flickering in his expression. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a neatly pressed suit that didn't belong in this heat. He glanced at the boys warily, unsure of their intentions. "Hey sir," Malik said with an easy smile. "You need a hand with that tire?" The man blinked, caught off guard. I suppose so," he said slowly. "My jack isn't working properly, and I'm not sure how to get the spare on." Tyree grinned. "No problem. We got you." He crouched beside the wheel and tapped it with his knuckle. "You're gonna need a good lift first." Malik went around to the trunk, found the jack, and started positioning it carefully. The man, still unsure what to make of their sudden offer, hovered nearby, glancing at his watch every few seconds. "You boys, sure you know what you're doing?" he asked. Deshaun chuckled. "Sir, we've fixed worse. My uncle's car don't even got 2 matching tires, and we keep that thing running." His humor lightened the air a little. The man smiled faintly for the first time, watching as the boys worked seamlessly together. The heat was relentless. Sweat rolled down their necks, soaking their shirts, and the metal of the tools burned to the touch. but none of them complained. Tyree steadied the jack while Malik loosened the bolts, his arms straining. Deshaun fetched the spare from the trunk and lined it up. Every move was instinctive, practiced from years of helping neighbors patch up beat-up cars. To them, this was nothing new, just another chance to do something useful. As they worked, Malik glanced up at the man, who was silently observing. "You from around here?" he asked. The man shook his head. "No, just passing through. I was on my way to a meeting, but..." He gestured helplessly at the car. "Seems the universe had other plans." Malik grinned. "Yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. Don't worry, we'll have you back on the road soon." The man nodded, his expression softening. He didn't say much after that, but his eyes followed their movements, fascinated. These boys, dressed in hand-me-down shirts and worn-out sneakers, were working with a level of efficiency that rivaled professionals. And they weren't asking for anything in return, not a single complaint, not a single mention of payment. When the last bolt was tightened, Malik gave the wheel a firm shake to make sure it was secure. "There," he said proudly, stepping back. "Good as new." The man bent down to inspect it, genuinely impressed. "You boys really know what you're doing," he said with a smile. "Thank you. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Deshaun shrugged. "Ain't no big deal, sir. Just helping out." The man reached into his pocket, pulling out a wallet. "At least let me give you something for your trouble." But Malik quickly shook his head. "Nah, you don't gotta do that," he said firmly. "We just glad to help someone who needed it." That answer stopped the man in his tracks. He was used to people wanting something, service in exchange for money, favors for connections, everything in life transacted. But these three boys stood there, dusty and smiling, asking for nothing but the satisfaction of having done something right. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, still holding the wallet. Malik nodded. "Yes, sir. Just drive safe." "All right?" The man hesitated, then slowly put the wallet back in his pocket. He extended his hand instead. "My name's Mr. Whitmore," he said, "and I won't forget this." Malik shook his hand, his grip firm and respectful. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitmore. Take care." Mr. Whitmore watched as the boys waved and walked back toward their neighborhood, their laughter echoing in the distance. He stood by his car for a long moment after they were gone, his thoughts tangled in something unexpected. For all his billions, for all his influence and luxury, it had taken three young strangers from the other side of life to remind him what decency truly looked like. As he got back into his car and drove away, a rare smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. The image of those boys, covered in dust and sweat but glowing with pride, stayed with him. He didn't know it yet, but their kindness had stirred something deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, maybe decades. And as the Bentley disappeared down the highway, the sun still burning high above the city, the wind carried the sound of the boys' laughter across the road like a promise that something much bigger had just begun. As Mr. Whitmore drove away that day, the silence in the car felt heavier than it ever had before. The hum of the engine filled the void as his thoughts drifted back to the three boys he had just met. He had spent decades surrounded by people who treated him with polished smiles and shallow flattery, people who measured his worth by his wealth and bowed to his influence. Yet, in the span of an hour, three dusty kids from a forgotten neighborhood had shown him more sincerity than anyone in his corporate empire ever had. Their laughter, their easy teamwork, their refusal to take money at all, echoed in his mind like a lesson he didn't know he needed. He thought about Malik, the way the boy's eyes had burned with quiet confidence as he guided the spare tire into place. There was a steadiness in him, the kind of focus you couldn't buy or teach. It came from struggle, from being raised to make things work even when the odds said they wouldn't. Deshaun had a spark too, quick with humor that broke tension effortlessly, while Tyree moved with the calm of someone used to responsibility far beyond his years. Together, they had something rare, an unspoken brotherhood built on loyalty, not gain. The deeper Mr. Whitmore thought about it, the more uneasy he felt about himself. He had grown up with nothing once too, a boy from South Carolina whose father fixed cars and mother cleaned houses. Back then, he'd dreamed of escaping poverty, of building a life where money could protect him from every kind of pain. And he had done it, built companies, owned homes in 3 countries, rubbed shoulders with governors and celebrities. But somewhere along the way, he had lost the simple things that made him human. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd gotten his hands dirty to fix something himself. He kept thinking about how the boys didn't hesitate to help him, even when he looked nothing like them and came from a world completely separate from theirs. There had been no fear, no judgment, just genuine compassion. That kind of purity was almost extinct in the world he lived in. His business meetings were full of men who shook his hand while plotting behind his back, partners who smiled as long as the profits flowed their way. Every deal, every dinner, every compliment had a price. But these kids had given without asking, helped without expecting, smiled without pretending. That night, Mr. Whitmore sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking the Atlanta skyline, but the view didn't impress him as it usually did. The city lights glittered like jewels scattered across darkness, but for once, they seemed distant and hollow. His mind kept replaying the image of Malik tightening the bolts, Deshaun wiping sweat off his face, and Tyree making sure the car sat steady before they finished. He had offered them cash out of habit, Not gratitude, it was how he had been trained to solve every problem. But when Malik refused it with that honest smile, it had shaken something deep inside him. For the first time in years, Mr. Whitmore realized how disconnected he'd become from the world outside his wealth. He'd been so used to thinking of success in numbers and assets that he'd forgotten what it meant to be grounded, to see people for their worth rather than their status. Those boys had done something he hadn't thought possible. They'd reminded him what humility felt like. The next morning, as he sat in his study sipping coffee, he couldn't stop thinking about how to reach them again. It wasn't just about gratitude, it was about acknowledgement. He wanted to do something that meant as much as their kindness had meant to him. He wanted to give them an opportunity that could change their lives, something more valuable than money handed out on impulse. But before he could plan anything, he wanted to understand who they were, where they came from, and what drove them to act the way they did. He made a few calls to his assistant, asking her to trace the neighborhood where he'd broken down. When she asked why, he simply said, "I met 3 young men who reminded me what success really looks like." That line hung in the air, even for him. Success wasn't about luxury cars or private jets, it was about integrity, character, and heart. Things that couldn't be bought but could build empires stronger than steel. Later that day, he took a quiet drive through the same streets where he'd been stranded. The contrast between his Bentley and the old houses, cracked sidewalks, and broken fences was jarring. Yet, as he passed through, he noticed life everywhere: kids playing basketball with a deflated ball, women talking on porches, an old man washing his car by hand. Despite the worn-out surroundings, the neighborhood pulsed with warmth and resilience. It was the kind of place where people didn't have much, but they shared what they did. He spotted a few kids around the corner who looked about the same age as the boys and stopped to ask, "You know Malik, Deshaun, and Tyree?" he asked from his window. The kids nodded immediately. "Yeah, they live down the block," one said, pointing toward a small, weathered house at the end of the street. Mr. Whitmore nodded, thanking them quietly before driving off. When he parked near the house, he didn't get out right away. He just sat there, taking in the sight of the modest home. The paint was peeling, the front steps creaked, and a basketball hoop leaned crookedly in the yard. Yet, even from inside his car, he could hear laughter spilling out from the open windows, the same laughter he'd heard when the boys walked away the day before. It made him smile without realizing it. Inside, Malik and his friends were sprawled out on the living room floor, playing cards and arguing playfully about who cheated last. They had already forgotten about the fancy car and the man in the suit, never imagining he'd even remember them. To them, it was just another good deed. Another day spent helping someone because it was the right thing to do. Mr. Whitmore sat there for several minutes, thinking about how such goodness could exist so purely. He thought about how their small act of kindness had done more than fix a flat tire. It had repaired something inside him that had been broken for a long time. He had built a fortress of success around himself, but in doing so, he had locked away his empathy. Now, because of 3 boys who expected nothing from him, he could feel that door opening again. When he finally started the car, a quiet resolve filled his chest. He knew what he wanted to do next. Gratitude wasn't just about saying thank you, it was about action, about using what you had to make a difference. Those boys didn't need his money. They needed opportunity, recognition, and someone who believed in their worth. And for the first time in years, Mr. Whitmore wanted to be that someone. As he drove off, his reflection caught in the rearview mirror. But it wasn't the same man who had stood helpless beside the road yesterday. Something had shifted behind his eyes, something deeper than pride or wealth. He realized that the greatest fortune a man could have wasn't measured in what he owned, but in what he could give. And in the people who reminded him of that truth when he least expected it. The morning sun crept slowly over the rooftops of the small Georgia neighborhood, spilling golden light across cracked sidewalks and old porches. It was the kind of quiet morning that began like any other, dogs barking in the distance, the faint smell of frying bacon drifting from open kitchen windows, and the rhythmic squeak of a screen door opening somewhere down the street. Malik was still half asleep, sitting at the breakfast table with his mom, scrolling lazily through his phone, unaware that today would be unlike any other day of his life. A low rumble echoed through the street, deep and unfamiliar, making the dishes on the counter tremble. Malik's mother frowned, glancing toward the window. "What on earth is that noise?" she muttered, pulling the curtain aside. Her hand froze midair, and her eyes widened in disbelief. Parked right in front of their small house was a gleaming white Rolls-Royce Phantom, its chrome grille catching the sunlight like a diamond. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. No car that expensive had ever even driven through their street before, let alone stopped right in front of their home. "Malik," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the window. "Baby, come look at this." Malik pushed his chair back, a hint of confusion on his face as he joined her. When he saw the car, his jaw dropped. "No way," he whispered. The door to the Rolls opened smoothly, and out stepped Mr. Whitmore, dressed in a crisp gray suit but wearing a much warmer smile than he'd had the day before. Neighbors began peeking out from porches and front yards, murmuring to each other, wondering what a man like that was doing there. Children stopped playing basketball to stare, and someone down the street even pulled out a phone to record the moment. Mr. Whitmore walked up the short path to Malik's door, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. Malik's mother hurried to open it before he could knock. "Good morning, ma'am," he greeted politely. "I hope I'm not intruding. I'm looking for Malik and his friends." Malik stepped forward, still stunned. Yes, sir, that's me," he said quickly. Deshaun and Tyree lived down the block, but Mr. Whitmore smiled and nodded. "I remember. Do you think you could call them? I'd like to speak with all three of you." Within 10 minutes, the boys were gathered outside, standing side by side in front of the Rolls-Royce like three soldiers waiting for orders. Their faces were a mix of awe and confusion. Mr. Whitmore looked at them proudly, almost fatherly. "I told you yesterday I wouldn't forget what you did," he said. "And I meant it." He motioned toward the car. The rear door opened, revealing a man in a chauffeur's uniform holding three large black. Malik blinked, his throat tightening as he lifted the lid of the box. Inside lay a sleek, brand-new laptop, the kind he had only ever seen in store displays. Deshaun gasped audibly, while Tyree just stared, speechless. None of them knew what to say. "That's not all," Mr. Whitmore continued. "I also made arrangements for you to visit one of my company's engineering centers next week. You'll meet my team, see how we work, and if you're interested, we'll sponsor you in a youth mentorship program." The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. Malik's mother brought a hand to her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. The boys stood frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. A billionaire had shown up at their doorstep not to reward them with money, but to give them a chance to change their lives. Deshaun finally found his voice. "Sir, we don't even know how to thank you," he said quietly. Mr. Whitmore smiled, a glint of warmth in his eyes. "You already did, son. You reminded me what matters. I just wanted to return the favor." The neighbors began clapping from their yards, some cheering, others wiping tears from their eyes. In a neighborhood where good news was rare, this moment felt like a miracle. Kids pressed up against fences, eyes wide as the boys stood proudly with their new laptops. For once, the whole community felt seen, as if kindness had drawn light into a place often overlooked by the world. Mr. Whitmore took a slow breath, glancing around at the people who had gathered. "I want everyone here to remember something," he said, raising his voice slightly. "You never know who's watching, or how far a small act of kindness can travel. These boys didn't fix a tire, they fixed a piece of my faith in people." He turned back to Malik and rested a hand on his shoulder. "Keep that heart, son. It'll take you farther than money ever could." Malik nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "We won't let you down." As Mr. Whitmore walked back to his car, the neighborhood applauded again. The Rolls-Royce engine purred softly as it pulled away, but the impression it left behind was louder than any sound. The boys stood there in stunned silence, holding their boxers like treasures, surrounded by friends and family who couldn't stop smiling. Malik's mother hugged him tightly, her voice trembling. "You see, baby, doing good always comes back around." Malik looked down the street, watching the Rolls-Royce disappear into the morning sun. He thought about how one small decision to help a stranger had brought this moment to life. He hadn't done it for recognition or reward.